My concern is civil rights for Black folk. So I told him I told him I could not attend such a meeting, but I didn't mind simply because of my commitment to Black people to writing up a position paper, an information paper that would go through and explain it to them. That's why in the letter that you just referenced, for instance, in space, I articulated some areas where Blacks are disadvantaged. In space, see, Black folk with only 2 major populations in this country, as an example, Dr. Watkins. And see, and Black folk were filling up that space. Black folk constitute almost 51 to 55% of the population of the United States, you know, up until before the Civil War. They were they dominated 5 or 6 southern states. Black folk were the major populations in South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. They were the dominant population, almost 55%. They made it up. When they started bringing in all these immigrants came to this country and started displacing Black folk in space, where space and land that Black folk should have had. They didn't get it. But immigrants came to this country. Every immigrant got 650 acres of land when they got here. They got 150 acres for every slave they owned. They took up almost 2 billion acres of land and that Black folk never got. They started displacing Blacks in space. The same thing has been occurring in the 50s. For instance, in Florida, the Cubans came in. Cubans now dominate Miami. They own and control Miami. They also took in Miami, we had Black cities and space in Miami and Florida that immigrants took over Overtown. They took over Liberty City. They took over Richmond Heights. They took over Coconut Grove, displaced Blacks in all those respects. I go to California. Immigrants took over California from Black folk. They took over Liberty. They took over Inglewood. They took over Compton. They took over Watts. They took over Central City. Now they're gentrifying all over America, displacing Blacks in space. All the major cities in the United States that used to be Black dominated, major urban areas, are going to be subjected to gentrification. They're going to be Blacks going to be kicked out of space all over this country. So that's just about space. They displace Blacks in employment, where in this country, where Blacks used to be the dominant population in everything, in all these major jobs, everything from barbershops to mining to labor classes, they displaced Blacks out of all those jobs, and they brought in immigrants, and immigrants displaced Blacks. I don't want to get into all the particulars of it, but just like also in economics, let me give you the statistics so you can tell our people to remember this. In economics, for every 10% increase in the number of immigrants entering this nation, the annual income of Black Americans will be reduced by 0.3%. As an example, in the 1950s, Blacks had an earning ratio of 56 cents for every $1 earned by a white. Now, as a result of this Black civil rights movement, Black earning ratio went up from 56% up to 66 cents in the white collar jobs. However, between 1970 and 1990, when this country came up with the new immigration policies because of the civil rights laws, that the number of immigrants, Asian, Arabs, and Hispanics went up over 300%. And guess what that did? That 300% increase in the number of Hispanics, Asian, and Arabs came into America, reduced Blacks from 66% back down to 56%, which means Black folk lost the 10% they made in doing the civil rights movement. They are back to where they were before the civil rights movement ever began. And so that's why even when Obama was in office, he came into office, and he tried to do some things in terms of employment. Almost 48 to 50% of all the jobs that occurred while Obama was the president of the United States went to Hispanics. And even they keep telling you the lies about what Black unemployment is only double whites. That's a lie. The Black unemployment rate at that time was 35% national for Black folk. You got a structural unemployment rate for Blacks in this country. What they keep using as a tool to gauge unemployment is only 2 things: people who are filing for unemployment benefits and those who are actively looking for jobs. Black folk have a historical structural unemployment rate, which means so many millions of Black folk just gave up, surrendered from never getting a damn job, or being fired from a job, or being underemployed. And so consequently, they replaced Blacks in jobs. They also replaced Black folk in the social consciousness of this country. Nobody talks about Blacks anymore. They talk only about Arabs, Asian, Hispanics. And I'm going to stop there. But even the Affirmative Action program I wrote in 1970, the 1970 Affirmative Action plan I wrote, which was the second affirmative action plan in the entire United States. I didn't write that affirmative action plan for minorities and poor folk and people of color, Arabs, Asian, Hispanics, and handicapped and poor people. I wrote it for Black folk. But guess what? As a result of it, that almost 80% of all the resources going through the affirmative action program went to Hispanics and Arabs. that in the 8A set-aside program, that's almost 100% Asians. And in typical affirmative action program across America, white women pick up 78% of all the contracts for services and goods, like in Texas, and the Hispanics get about 27%, and blacks get 9/10 of one. And I'll stop there.
Wow. Dr. Anderson, I mean, that's powerful. And I want everybody to pay attention, hear what he's saying. What he's saying is that that you have been, some would argue that that you as Black people have been convinced to vote against your own interests, basically. You've been convinced that illegal immigration or legal immigration, whichever kind of immigration, that benefits you, that this is part of some broad coalition that, like, oh, we're all going to be this big group and we're all going to work together and everybody's going to win. And you're kind of being bamboozled. You know what it reminds me of, Dr. Anderson? I remember when I was a kid, I used to go to Sunday school, and at Sunday school they would have these contests, based on who could memorize verses from the Bible. And I was, I guess, pretty good at memorizing the different books of the Bible and verses and everything. So I'd memorized the more verses than anybody else. So they were going to let me. They were going to let the winner of the competition, which was me at the time. I was real proud and happy. I was about 9 years old. The winner would get to put his hand in a big jar full of pennies and grab as many pennies as you could get, right? And that was my, so I was excited. I'm getting ready. I'm flexing my hand, trying to see if I can grab as many pennies as possible. And I was on the bus with this boy. I never forget, his name was Warren, and he was about 3 years older than me. He's about 12. And which, when you're 9 years old, that's like a giant, And I thought Warren was my friend. I thought Warren, I looked up to him. I thought he was like my mentor and everything else. And I didn't know Warren was actually playing me. So Warren said to me, he said, boys, he said, look, my hands are much bigger than yours. And he said, so why don't you let me grab the pennies for you? And then we'll just, we'll just share the money, because I can grab more pennies because I got a bigger hand. Right. Well, what Warren did was Warren went in there, and I agreed to it. I said, OK, that sounds good. Great idea. That's all right. Great. So he goes in there and he grabs all the pennies and he puts all the pennies in his pocket. And I'm showing up saying, hey, where's my pennies? Where's my cut? We did good, didn't we? Like that. And Warren wasn't even talking to me. Now, at that point, I can't find Warren because Warren done ran off with my money. And that makes me think about what the Democratic Party and what these other folks do to Black people. They say, hey, come along, Black people, we need your vote. Come on, rock the vote. Your ancestors died for you to vote. Put us in power. And then when we get the power, we're going to share it with everybody. We're going to make sure that we take good care of you and everything else. So we show up, being good slaves that we are, and we give them all the power. And we end up looking deflated and as depressed as I was when I let Warren go grab the pennies that really belong.